One of the biggest parts of being really good at something in football is getting your guys out in space. The biggest part of that is blocking on the perimeter and getting guys out in space. It's hard to get guys out in space the way that Georgia runs an offense without good perimeter blocking. I'm going to tell you right now, if Georgia doesn't get better at perimeter blocking, they're going to eat a few L's this season, not just one or two. And that's something that's got to get better for Georgia. If they do not solve this problem, you better watch out. Because when you watch the Kentucky game specifically, the the effectiveness that we saw from Darnell Washington or Lab McConkey over these last couple of years, it was not there at all the other night. Urasek has got to get better at blocking on the perimeter. If he's going to play tight end at Georgia, forget any one player. Anybody that's going to be out there on Georgia's offense and is going to play on the perimeter, they've got to go fight. They've got to go win those chicken fights. I don't really know how else to describe them. And it's hard. It's hard to do it. Don't get me wrong. But it's harder for the defender. The defender is trying to whip you and stop someone who's running pretty much at 90% speed or 85% speed and can jiggle their way around you. So it's a very complicated thing for defenders to defeat a block and then go tackle someone. And that happened multiple times against Kentucky, particularly early in the game. And you can't take advantage of having Dylan Bell, of having ETN. You can't take advantage of guys like that, Nate Frazier, if you are not blocking effectively on the perimeter, because a lot of what Georgia has done recently is get the ball on the perimeter and make the defense cover all 53 and whatever feet this from sideline to sideline. It's hard to do it, man. Nobody really wants to run like that. I mean, a DB is not going to want to run from his number to the other number. You know, a hash to a hash, okay, whatever. But like from one sideline to the other in pursuit, that's the hard part. Is the defense never knows where the ball is going to be. They don't. They can think they know, and there are cues and there are things you're supposed to do. But you really, if you're playing sports right, you really should be in a dead sprint as soon as you see the ball going where you know it's supposed to go. I remember talking to Glenn Schumann heading into the Ohio State game. We only get a chance to talk to him, depending on the year, about 3 times a year. And one thing that he said about what Malachi Starks did against Missouri in 2022 was, I asked Glenn about that, and he talked about how a run like that for Missouri, it was a significant run. I can't remember, but Malachi got him right before he got the running back right before he got in the end zone. Georgia forced a field goal, and Georgia won the game by 4. So there you go. But one thing that Glenn was saying was that should never happen. Like, it's one thing to get through the defensive line, it's another thing to get through the linebackers. But there are systems, there are checks that should be happening along the way. And, someone a lot smarter than me can explain those and the nomenclature that people use in college football. But think of it as checks and balances. And that's what pursuit is, really. That has been something that Georgia's offense has not been doing to other people. Oh, excuse me, did not do well against Kentucky. Okay? One game is not a season. One play is not a game. And there's a lot of different things that go into Georgia. I'd have to go back and look, but Georgia's probably had 35 drives of offense. That actually sounds a little high. I'll go back and look. But on all of those drives, either you score, you turn it over, or you punt. I mean, or you down it. You can end games too. So that end games are halves, and that's been a couple of Georgia's drives. But a lot of what Mike Bobo, everyone's favorite villain, I guess, at Georgia, likes to do is, and understandably, is get the guys with some serious speed on the perimeter. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, you don't have Lab McConkey anymore, who is super wiggly and very fast. But you do have Dylan Bell, who is smoking. You do have Arian Smith, who is smoking. You do have ETN, who is extremely fast. You have Frazier, who is extremely fast. They're not going to use him because he's younger. They've only used him in one situation. He had a good play, which is Dwight Phillips, who is extremely fast but young. So what you want to do is get the ball on the outside to where, naturally it's more, there are more one-on-one situations. Well, you're not going to get one-on-one if your guys are getting their ass whipped on the outside. So Georgia can't spend a whole week working on perimeter blocking. That would be completely foolish. What they have to do is execute when they're out there. And it's not just Urasek. It's other people too. I mean, Oscar Delp, he has not had the type of season yet that I think he's capable of. And we're just going to see where it goes. I mean, again, just because, something starts one way doesn't mean it's going to finish that way. And frankly, the comparisons to previous seasons are always easy because they're right there. They're in your memory bank. It's easy to remember. I remember how Georgia played at the beginning of 2022. The Oregon game was outstanding, but there were some times where they didn't play so hot at the beginning of the season, and no one was ever wondering what's wrong with Georgia because they beat South Carolina 48-7 and they beat Oregon 49-3. Well, the other two games in that 4-game stretch were Samford, where they did not play well in the first half. Whether you remember it or not, I don't know. I do, and it was fine. And they certainly didn't play well against Missouri in Game 4, which was the 26-22 fight. This was similar to that game, the Kentucky game. It was actually a lot more in terms of what it felt like. It felt a lot like the Georgia Tech game last year or the Auburn game last year because of the style that the defense was dealing with. Georgia Tech continued to run the ball. I mean, Georgia's defense faced 73 plays the other day. That is a significant number of plays. That happens about 20% of the season, and a lot of times that happens in games that are kind of blowouts. So that's another thing that you kind of want to be wary of is why, how much was the defense out there and what were they dealing with the entire time? You're allowed to get off the field and you're allowed to, every single time you get the ball, to go score. That's not something you're permitted to do that. But Georgia's faced this decade 12 times in 57 games, so 21% of the time, 12 times they have faced a team that snapped it 70 plus times. They just dealt with that with Kentucky. And they have not dealt with that a lot lately. In the 23 season, that only happened once. And you would probably not guess the game. I'll give you 2 seconds to say it out loud. 1, 2. If you guess the UAB game, you're correct because that was the only game. And in that game, that was the second. That was the third most all time this decade with 77 snaps against Georgia. The Gators had 80 in 2020, and then I said the third most. I meant the fourth most. The Gators had 80 in 2020. Alabama had 85 in the national championship game. 85 snaps against Georgia. That's a lot. And then Tennessee in 2021 had 84. The only team that's on my list here a few times is Tennessee. Well, Alabama as well, actually. And Georgia's lost, I think, 4 games this decade. Twice in 2020, once in 21, and then once in 23. So those 4 games, 3 of the 4 losses came when Georgia faced 70 plus snaps on defense. So what does one thing have to do with the other? One really doesn't have anything to do. I guess if you blocked better on the perimeter, you'd have the ball longer or for more, it'd be more of a blowout or whatever. But Kentucky seemed to be saying, we're just going to run. Like, that's it. We're gonna rely on Brock to do stuff when he can do it, but we're not relying on him to win the game. We're just gonna run, and that's it. And they did, and they didn't score a touchdown. So for Georgia on offense, this is really about playing better where you need to play better. The offensive line was not great, but there were just way too many times when Georgia was not like itself. I mean, that's all there was to it. Kentucky's defense is good. Their offense is not. But their defense is good, and their special teams kept them in the game, period. That game probably should have been something like Georgia winning 17-6 or maybe 20-9. But this guy's out here kicking 50-yarders, and it makes it a lot more complicated, right? I mean, so you've got all that. But, it was what it was. And sometimes you have to, I wouldn't say they stole the game. Sometimes you have to fight your way out of Commonwealth. Sometimes you have to fight your way out of Bobby Dodd, Mark Rick Field. It happens. But the thing that will prevent that from happening more often is you got to block better on the perimeter. There's too much advantage that Georgia can take not to take advantage of that. And they're going to need to do a better job. It's not the skill guys on those plays. What I mean to say is it's not the person with the ball usually that's making the mistake. It's the other guys. And if they don't get it right, it's making for a long and bitter season, at least long enough.